Yeah. So you've been using Fireflies for about a year and a half.
It's been about 18 months using Fireflies. I just wanted to have, some way to take notes that I could primarily go back in that were kind of indexed and I could search for particular topics. And in the coaching business, it just seems to help me with my organization and topics and ideas covered and that type of thing. So it's been about 18 months.
Okay. And so, but before we went on the air here, we were talking about getting kind of used to Fireflies. You said it took you about 3 months or
3 months.
so. Okay. I'm probably on month one.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, I'm still taking notes, and I'm catching myself taking notes. And I'm not doing as good of a job of like going in and reading the recaps. The emails help. So
right.
Yeah, and maybe I should pause here and explain what we're talking about. So, Fireflies.ai, it's almost like a personal assistant or virtual assistant AI platform, and it dials into all your calls, and it'll transcribe the call or the meeting for you. It'll take notes. It uses AI to kind of go and disseminate the conversation and pull out the key points and action items and things like that. And it sends me an email after the call, but it sends emails out to the other folks that were on the call, if you have it set up that way.
Right.
Is that
yeah, and it does
thing?
full transcriptions and
Yeah. So Matt turned me on to this a couple months ago, and after probably 2 calls, and I saw the output that he was getting from our calls. I was like, all right, I got to get on this.
It's about the best $10-20 or whatever you can spend if you're trying to run a business.
Yeah. I mean, the issue now is like, I've got the tool. Now I need to operationalize it and figure out how to, like, the tool's not become a part of my day to day yet. And that's the missing link. So I'm not getting as much value out of it as I should be.
Yeah. We do a lot of things like this. If you just think about just even like enterprise class tools, companies, I worked for some pretty large corporations in my background. We invested millions of dollars in tools. And it seemed like a lot of the emphasis went to implementing the tool. And we somewhere in the process would lose the whole focus of whatever process we were trying to enable with it. Have you ever seen that happen?
Oh yeah. So I did a talk, October 23, at Security B-Side St. Louis about security project management. And I had an entire section in this talk that was called MVP is a Trap.
Okay.
And I'm still a firm believer in it, because MVP, when you're implementing a new tool or a solution, and like, MVP is great. So MVP is your minimum viable product. It's not most valuable player in this sense.
Right.
So your minimum viable product, this is the minimum amount that you need to get to for you to be able to use the tool or the solution. And a lot of times, and this isn't necessarily just a security problem, but this is just a technology and project management problem in general. But like, we implement these solutions to MVP, and then there's no plan in place how to get the other, like, value out of the other 80% of the functionality that's in the tool. And there's always the next thing. And so when you've planned and you've allocated resources to implement to MVP, you get there, and then you don't necessarily have all the resources allocated anymore to continue implementing the rest of the solution. And so you're paying 100% of the cost for the platform, and you're getting 20% of the value out of it.
Yeah, I've seen this so much. I saw it a lot working in corporations. I tried to take those lessons learned when I started my own business and had to start making investments where, these were my investments that I had to make. Try to ensure that I limited the amount of like abandoned or orphaned technology investments I made, or at least also, ones where I had intent behind it, would purchase something and then not fully utilize it.
Yeah.
So one thing I saw effectively done in corporations that kind of figured this out was to really start at the beginning with figuring out what the entire business process was, and then figured out where a technology solution, an unnamed technology solution, could potentially be used to facilitate or enable some part of the process, or all of the process, or 90% of the process, or something. And once that was done, then I saw better adoption, and then ROI on those tools when that was done in that order, right? Where it was really well thought out. The process was defined, and then the tools were purchased to enable the process in some way. I tried to do a little bit of that with my own company, and just on a different level of trying to understand and so Fireflies was one of those. So for me, I looked at all the capabilities of Fireflies, and I said, oh, geez, I'm overwhelmed with this. There's so many things this can do. There's 100 apps that can connect to. I don't know if you've ever looked at all the stuff you can actually do with it, but they give you access to the API, so you can put it in make.com automations and do all this crazy stuff with it. And I just was starting to get overwhelmed with all the capabilities of this thing. I said, okay, stop. Let me go back. What am I actually trying to do here? What is the process what is my coaching process? What are my sessions look like? What would be the benefits if I had them auto transcribed, if I had those stored someplace, if I could search, what does that whole process look like? And then I looked at the list of all the benefits or the capabilities of the tool Fireflies and said, okay, these are my top 5 things I want to do with this. Some of these other things are interesting to know that it does, but I'm not going to focus on those at all. Kind of that paradox of choice we talked about before, where if you have too many things that you're trying to consider, you can't make a decision then. It's the paradox of choice. I feel that way when you're looking at technology too. If there's so many capabilities, you'll sometimes overbuy, or you'll buy for capabilities that you never intended taking full advantage of. You don't have a plan behind them. So this idea of laying things out and putting your criteria in place. So I think this works whether you're you have a business, or you're working in somebody else's business, or you're just trying to find technologies or tools that will help you on an individual level. I think the same criteria applies. Productivity tools are a good example of this. So you can buy a lot of software to help you with like just managing tasks and your personal productivity. ClickUp and Notion and a bunch of these tools. Again, you can get overwhelmed if you just go to that website and look at the capabilities listed for the tools. You're just like, oh, this is awesome. There's so many great things I can do. What are the really most important things though for me, and which ones are going to stick that I can commit to?
Yeah. And understanding like which aspects of this are going to fit in with the way I work.
Right.
Some of them may not, and some of them may not because the way that you're working isn't great.
Right.
And you need to change some of your process to align with the tool. I've worked in a lot of organizations that there's different words that like every organization seems to use for this idea or this concept, but they take a platform or a framework or a methodology that's really like well fleshed out, proven, tested in the market, and then they adopt it. And the first thing that they want to do is bastardize half of it.
Yes.
And hey, we're going to customize this to us, which on one hand, it's rare that you can find any sort of framework or process or tool that's not going to require any customization for your environment, because every environment's different. But on the other hand, like Agile is a really good example of this. In fact, it's probably the example that I've seen play out the most over the last few years in dozens of organizations, where they have this idea that, hey, we're going to bring Agile or safe into our environment. And first off, they think it's going to solve all their problems. And like newsflash, it's not. In fact, if you don't have a good plan in place, like you may have just created a lot of additional problems. But yeah, so like they bring this into their environment and they're like, well, we're going to use Agile for everything. It's like, well, Agile is really designed for like product management and software development. So if you're saying that all your service and support teams are going to be Agile now, like that doesn't align with the way that they operate or what's mission critical for them. All you're doing is you're adding additional administrative overhead, and they're not seeing the benefits that Agile really brings, because that's not what they do. But organizations love to put that, that square peg in a round hole. And all of a sudden now they've actually lost productivity because they want to take this framework and they want to shove a process into it, or they go the exact opposite way and they say, okay, well, we're going to take 50% of what makes agile work, we're going to peel that back and we're going to customize it for our environment. And then 2 or 3 years down the road, they're like, I don't understand why we're not seeing the benefits out of agile that this consultant said that we would. Well, it's because
Right.
what you're doing isn't agile anymore.
Right. It's
What you're
agile like.
doing, yeah, it's agile like. What you're doing is waterfall with agile words.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. It's marketing. It's agile marketing.
yeah, 100%. But I mean, they bought into it, so somebody made their money somewhere along the way. But that's a sad reality that I've seen play out a lot.
When I've seen this happen, because, I can go back to the late 90s with frameworks and just different things. And whenever I've seen this take place, and I had people working for me in those environments, and we would have this very conversation. Hey, this isn't like a vanilla implementation or use of this anymore. This is changing, it's morphing. I always told people, I said, I think what I would encourage you to do is try to understand the core, or the actual framework itself from a theoretical standpoint. Understand as much as you can about it, so that you can actually explain these variations, these things that we're morphing into with it, so that you understand what's the theoretical idea behind it in its purest implementation, versus what we're actually doing with it. Because if you can get to that level to understand it, when you've got a really good set of knowledge now about the actual framework, because you've invested the time to understand on a theoretical level. So if you ever leave here and want to talk to somebody else about this framework, you understand the theory behind it and what it looks like in its purest sense. But then you also are equipped with being able to explain variations that you also experienced off of the theory, right? Off of the pure framework itself. And that deeper understanding you get. So we can go in and we can look at things, and it's easy to go, we're really not doing this because we've varied it now. There's variance to the how it's supposed to work. Great, but I need that to be universally understood and appreciated. So therefore, I have to be able to explain what it is in its purest sense, and then what I experienced and how it differed, and how the variation broke it, or in some cases made it different. So I think there's a lot of times we're in these environments, we look at things and go, yeah, this is the obvious. This isn't what it's supposed to be, or we're not doing something we should do. That's where, again, I challenge people to look back and go, okay, well, how much can you learn about how it's actually supposed to be working? And then use that knowledge to explain how this is different than that. So rather than just complain about it or make an observation from the peanut gallery, how can you explain this? Because that's where you can provide value to somebody else in your analysis and explanation of this.
Yeah, in my experience, one of the kind of the key aspects of this is the direction on what you need to do comes from the top down, which, I mean, as it should. But the problem is the understanding of the methodology or the framework or the process isn't there at the top.
Right.
Like they've said, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to follow this framework, but they don't necessarily understand the framework. So they don't necessarily understand why their directive doesn't align with the teaching of what they're saying you have to do. And that's really challenging.
Well, this is a lot like your customers, though. The same thing happens. Your customers ask for things or they give you a directive. I'm buying for this reason. I want this solution. I want it done in this particular way. That is the challenge that we all have, whether it's your executive leadership team, or if you're in a situation where you're selling services or products to somebody as a customer. There's an education part of this that gets overlooked a lot. The better that you can educate people, it doesn't mean you tell them what to do, but you inform them as to, here's what this looks like in its purest sense, a framework, for example. You're asking, let me educate you a little bit. Let me take a minute and share this with you. What you're asking me to do is something that is a variance to this. I just want you to understand that it's changing this. I'm not telling you that you're wrong. I'm just informing you that there's a difference here. And so because there's a difference in this, it may not be as predictable as it was if we were just following the framework.
Yes.
And I want you to make the best, most informed business decision you can make, whether you're an executive leader or a customer.
Feeling stuck in your career? Like you're not reaching your full potential? At Greenbox U, we help you unlock the hidden potential within your career journey. Our Digital Foundations for Success course, combined with personalized coaching, equips you with the tools and strategies to discover, monetize, and apply your unique skills, knowledge, and experiences. Don't just meet expectations, exceed them.
Yeah, we had a conversation about this a couple weeks ago where we were talking about, like, in the sales process, what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to demonstrate to the customer that you are going to make it easy to solve their problem. Mm-hmm. And whether we're talking about a customer or whether we're talking about an executive, like, they're looking for someone that can make it easy to solve this problem. And when an executive comes in and says, hey, we're going to start doing things this way, like, it's because someone somewhere has said that if you do it this way, it's going to make it easier to solve this problem.
Right.
In the scenario that we're talking about here, in a lot of cases over the last, 15 years, it's been the folks from SAFE, or Scrum Alliance or one of these other organizations have come in and they've said, we're going to make it easy to solve this problem of your projects not finishing on time and on schedule and on budget, right. And delivering the value that you're hoping that they'll deliver. And these individuals have done a better job of selling that they have an easy solution than their internal teams have, because their internal teams haven't solved the problem, which is why they're looking outside for something new.
Okay, so this is the best illustration of this is outsourcing.
Yeah.
Have you been in an environment that's ever had any outsourced functions?
Yes, several of them, and more and more every year, it feels like.
Yes. I mean, my first exposure to it was over 20 years ago.
Yep.
And the interesting thing about it was that you could see how this particular company had no idea about how things were actually working on a day-to-day basis when they had control of it. This third-party outsourcer came in and pitched this turnkey solution, in essence, right? I'm oversimplifying, but this turnkey solution, like, let's rebadge people. We'll use our best practices to run your environment to do X, Y, and Z, right? That's the promise of the outsourcing, right? We can do it better, faster, cheaper.
Yep.
Rebadge people, eliminate, redundant functions, blah, blah, blah. The problem is that I've saw it time and time again, those outsourced engagements, and it's insourced again. It's brought back in because the cost got so out of control, because people didn't have a really good understanding about how things were working in the first place. When the outsourcer put the agreement in place and then put all these exceptions in and started to charge for all the different exceptions to whatever the standard was, everybody quickly realized that, my gosh, we're running this organization that everything is an exception based, and the exceptions are causing increased costs, which is making the outsourced arrangement more expensive than when we just had everything internal.
Mm-hmm. Or, this is another thing that I've seen. They outsource because they want to save on labor, right? But they didn't really dig in deep enough to see that the labor line wasn't their biggest expense as it relates to this process. And while they've saved on the labor line, they've actually created additional overhead somewhere else where the biggest expenses are. I saw this firsthand. A lifetime ago, feels like a different life. I used to work in the collection industry. Mm-hmm. So I started, that was my first professional job, Matt. I was a bill collector, if you want to call that a professional job.
Yeah.
So I've been a car salesman. I sold used cars for a while. I've been a bill collector. And I like to say, if I go to law school, become an attorney, and maybe run for office, I'll have the market cornered on, like, the most hated professions on earth. lawyer, politician, used car salesman, bill collector. I'll have them all. But anyway, I worked at this collection agency, and this is exactly what they did. They outsourced basically the collection agents to a company in Central America.
Okay.
And I mean, there was probably a 60% savings on the labor line. Mm-hmm. But what they didn't really account for was our biggest expense, at least for the department that I managed, was mail. Like it wasn't labor. Like we were spending $5 million a week sending out collection notices. And so then you look at, hey, I'm spending $5 million a week on collection notices. And on average, I get, 2% that call back in. And so now you can assign a dollar figure to every contact that you get because you had to spend this amount to get it. And if your outsourced labor only converts at 40% of what your insourced was, they're basically like you're squandering 60% of your largest expense.
Yeah.
And before long, we realized like, wait a minute, this is actually costing us significantly more money. We're not saving anything, and we're not generating as much income.
Yeah.
And it was an 18-month experiment that probably could have been over in 18 days, but it took a while to explain or convince the powers that be that, their miraculous money saving, scheme didn't quite work out the way they thought it was going to.
Yeah. Well, that's what you get into sometimes when you're not trusting the people around you. Well, there's different reasons for it, right? But there's empowerment of employees. There's trusting employees. There's trusting leadership or executives. Cultures where there's not trust, and it's really hard because these are, let's be honest, it's a large corporation.
This was, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, things become so bureaucratic and there's just lots of different variables at play. It's hard for people to actually trust one another. The system almost encourages people to not share key critical things with each other. There's like a lot of protecting going on for things. And it's just,
yes,
I'm not saying anything illegal, but I'm just talking about the protecting of knowledge that we can't share with people because it's a need to know basis and they don't need to know.
And there's politicking,
Sure.
One person wants their solution to be the one that gets chosen because then if it works out, then that's going to be really good for their career. Other people may have a vested interest in making sure that a solution is not successful.
Right.
And yeah, you see that all the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So what do you need to do as somebody working in one of these environments then to maintain your sanity while you're trying to help the organization be successful and help yourself become successful when you're working in an environment like this?
That's $1 million question.
Yeah. And there's no silver bullet for it.
No, I think it's different in every scenario. And like I hate to jump to the end here, but sometimes there isn't a right answer. Sometimes the answer is, hey, this is not the environment for me.
Yeah, you know what I think here's how I would try to answer it. I agree with that. Sometimes that is what happens. The other thing I would say is that you control what you can control.
Yeah.
And I think that we all need to understand what our purpose is, what's driving us, what's our North Star that we're trying to follow and guide us in the work that we do every day, in the life that we're trying to lead. And if we use that North Star, it helps us evaluate the organization that we're in, the job that we have, whatever it might be, that helps us. And if it's misaligned, we have to make a decision about how hard do we want to work to try to align it? Is it possible to align it? Or are my services just best used someplace else? Should I just take my services and find another opportunity? To me, it starts with purpose though, because we can control that, understanding what that purpose is.
Yeah. You you gave me one of the best analogies I've heard around this. The one about the baton.
Oh
So
yeah.
like you're part of a team, you're running a relay race, but you can only control what happens after you get handed the baton and when you hand the baton off. Like in between those two events, that's what's
Yeah.
in your span of control. And that's what you need to really focus on, maximizing or doing the best in. Because when other people are running with the baton, that like you've got really limited control over that, or none whatsoever.
The reason I figured that out was because I in the beginning of my career, I had a lot of things I worked on where I was in almost complete control of everything I was doing. So I was launching it, starting blocks to crossing the tape at the end of the race. And I prided myself on how effective all that was. Okay, so I was defining my success and all the rest based on starting and then finishing and completing things. And then the more complicated work and complex work I got in, where I started working inside very large organizations and companies, everything was very siloed and fragmented. And what I realized is that very rarely did I witness anything go from the starting blocks to actually cross the finish line. Most things stopped somewhere in the process. And so I had this tremendous sense of being like unfulfilled or feeling like a failure because the things I was working on weren't crossing the finish line. And so I had to redefine what success meant and my role in it. And what I could figure out that analogy around the relay race is that if I was responsible for successfully grabbing the baton, running my segment and passing the baton off, that I could evaluate my performance based on that outside of whatever the context of whatever was happening with anybody else and what segments they were running and whether they finished the race or didn't finish the race. I could only control what I could control. And when I kind of redefined things like that, I started feeling good again about the work that I was doing and the fact that, wow, there is a sense of accomplishment here and I'm learning something, and that even if we didn't go all the way to the finish line, I'm better equipped now for the next time we do something similar to this, or I can take what I learned here and go apply it. And then I started to, kind of pull back in different roles where I had more responsibility for the entire race being run. And, it wasn't just me being one of the relay runners, but then I started to understand kind of that at a macro level, and then the micro level was the handoffs going on. So, but yeah, I think a lot of that is and again, I'll just go back to the purpose and put a fine point on it. I think if you know what your purpose is and what you're always striving towards, that helps you understand why you're even running the race and what your role is in the race. If we're just waiting for somebody else to define everything for us, that may or may not align with what we actually want to do. Why? Think about it this way. If you think about how much time people are spending in jobs, it's just the work-life balance thing is so overplayed. It's not even a good way to describe it anymore because it's so one-sided for the average person.
Yeah.
If you think about the journey that people are on, where if, for example, if they take kind of a traditional path where they graduate from high school and people tell them, hey, go to college, you'll get a degree and you'll get a better job. So oftentimes people go into significant debt to get the degree. Nobody ever tells them actually how to get a job. So then they graduate and then they have to go through that whole process of trying to learn how to position themselves for an opportunity and selling their potential that they have versus the lack of experience they have. And then they end up in roles where all of a sudden they're working with 3% merit increases annually. And they're incurring even more debt typically in their lives at the same time. Well, I'm buying a new car. I've got a car payment now. I've got a house I'm responsible for. Life gets complicated. Life gets more expensive. We incur more debt. And now all of a sudden we're kind of trapped in a system where now I don't like what I'm doing every day, that I'm spending 8 or 9 hours in the job and I'm spending another hour or two commuting around to and from the job. And now my life is revolving around this thing. If it's not aligned to your purpose, what are you really interested in doing? This is a lot of time that we're spending in our life, and our lives are very complicated, and there's a lot of pressure with the debt and a lot of the other things I just mentioned as kind of ancillary things. If you don't have a purpose determined and you're not working towards it and trying to understand it, you can get lost. It's like being lost out at sea.
Yeah. there's some people that like they do a good job of almost disassociating at work and just saying, this is what I do while I'm here, and I'm just going to do this job, and then at 4:30 or 5 when my day's over and I'm going home. And I've known several people like that are very, very happy. In fact, in some cases, they're some of the happier people that I know. But then there's other people that can't, for one reason or another, either because their identity is very much associated with the job that they're doing, or their sense of self-worth is tied to the job that they're doing, or sometimes it's just because, to your point, there's a lot of debt, there's a lot of opportunity, and like there are a lot of, additional considerations that are directly associated with the job they do and the money they make and the opportunities that are going to come up. And it's going to be a big differentiator in their life. And so it's hard, if not impossible, to disassociate.
It is. You have to me, and I was like the poster child for how not to do this for years. Okay. So when I talk about any of this stuff, it's from my own bad experiences with not being aligned very well. But I think as I stepped away from it and analyzed how I got myself into certain situations, I started to just take learnings away from that. And you can't go back and redo it, but you can prevent yourself from making the same mistakes over and over again. And that's really what I try to put my focus on. I saw a great quote this week. I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's like something to this effect. I don't want to be the richest man in the graveyard I don't want to be the richest man in the cemetery.
Yeah.
Think about that. Like, what's the point?
There is
what is the point of all that? And this goes back to, there's just, the world can either be a very complex place to operate in, or it can be a very simple place. As I get older, I'm realizing that I like it when it's a very simple place. The complexity that I add when I was younger, that I added into the world, how I looked at it, made for not such a great experience all the time. As I've simplified the world, I'm a happier person in it. If that makes any sense at all.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Like in fact, I would say that for the first 25, 30 years of my life, and, we'll say, 10, 15 years of my professional career, like I was constantly working to make my circle bigger. And now I spend a lot of time making my circle smaller, and the people that are in my circle, the things that are in my circle, the interest, like not spreading myself so thin, and I'm way, way happier for it. I mean, there's some things that I'm never going to get to do and never get to experience, or at least probably not, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah. That's probably self-discovery goes into a lot of it. You got to experience certain things to know. We all have to experience, and then we have to learn from those experiences. We learn what we like, and we learn what we don't like. And then if it's things we don't like, right, we work to figure out how to prevent those things from happening again.
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, if I work professionally, if I work and it's not aligned with my purpose, it's a destructive thing. It's a destructive element in my life. And it's not good for me. And it doesn't the results are not positive. It's not good. I'm not making any meaningful contributions to anything. Yeah, I'm doing a good job, whatever. The widgets are coming off the assembly line faster somehow, but it has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with my personal, with my family, whatever it might be that's really important. It is just interesting how we look at all of these things, and it's almost like there's a lot of propaganda involved in it. Like there's a lot of propaganda in what you hear. I'll give you a perfect example. So So I have a teaching degree. I started out in the field of education. I think it would be strange for people to really actually understand the purpose of a liberal arts education in the context of the last half of the 20th century and the 21st century in terms of the economy and how we view education as it relates to those things. If you go back to why are you learning things and what's your exposure to ideas and theory and literature and all these different things, it's to gain a well-rounded understanding of the world and thought and all these different, how to think through things and reason. You would get none of that. Most people get none of that. They think my education is solely associated with the best job I can get or something, right? Well, that's an aspect of it. We're not learning for the sake of learning. We're learning so we can get a degree so that we can go get a better job out of it. Well, you and I both know that only goes so far. That yes, the degree can help you get a different type of job sometimes. But okay, so you're in it. What do you understand about yourself? What do you understand about a larger world?
And I know we've talked about this before, but I'm going to do a plug for Western Governors University here. This was the first time that I went to college, which is always fun to say. I was 18. I went right after high school. And I was going to get a degree to get a job.
Yeah.
I was studying, my major was mass communication. What did I want to do with mass communication? No idea. Nothing. Get a job and hopefully something. Yeah. And so the entire expected, end of this was get degree, get job. Doesn't matter what the degree's in. It can't be too hard because I didn't want to work that hard. So I chose, communications. I'm like, I figure I'm pretty good at talking. We'll do communications. And then it didn't work out for me. I ended up dropping out and not graduating. And then I didn't go back to school for 15 years.
Right. Okay.
Until I discovered something I was interested in, and which was cybersecurity. And then I'm like, all right, I actually like this. I want to learn more about this. And there's a degree program in this where I can learn more about this. And it's a good career. Like I can go do this for my job for the rest of my life if I want to. And then all of a sudden I was going back to school on my dime, on my schedule, on my choice. WGU made it possible to do all that. Like their program was designed around people like me, or at least it felt like it. And I went back to school a second go around studying a significantly more difficult subject.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got the entire degree in under 3 years.
How many people spend a lot of money on their education, get a degree in something and go get a job in something? Their purpose isn't aligned to it. They don't really care about it. And then they struggle to get up every morning and go, why in the world am I doing this? Well, I got to do it now because I got a boatload of debt that I have to service and I have to pay for all these different things and my lifestyle and all the rest of it. And right, the misalignment is the root cause of all of it to me.
I have one of my good friends. So he went to school and got a degree in human resources. He worked in retail human resources for several years. He was a coworker of mine at one of my first jobs. And he was in HR for 20 plus years. I would say he was probably making, I don't know, somewhere around like $150,000 to $170,000 a year in a medium to low cost of living environment.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, he was doing great.
Yeah.
From the outside.
Sure.
From the outside, he was doing great. Every time I talked to him, he was completely miserable. He didn't like his job. He didn't like what his job was turning into. His job, he got into it because he cared about people and he wanted to be an employee advocate. And he found out pretty early on in the human resources journey that he was not an employee advocate. And he became something else and he didn't like it anymore. And he kept doing it for a while. For a long time because of the money he was making. And then one day I get a phone call from him and he said, "Hey, I want to let you know I quit my job today." And I said, "Well, all right. Congratulations. I hope. Like, what's next?" He said, "Yeah, I got an internship in HVAC." This guy's at the time, I bet 44, 45 years old,
Yeah.
and quit a very solidly six-figure job, office
Right.
job, work from home, uh, to go become a journeyman HVAC installer. And that was about 3 years ago. I've seen him. He lives about 6 or 7 hours from me, so I don't see him that often. But I've seen him a couple times since in person. Talked to him several times. The last time I saw him, he's probably lost 60 pounds
Oh yeah.
since, because he's on his feet every
He's
day.
not
He's outside
sedentary all
every
day.
day.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, and he couldn't be happier.
Yeah.
I mean, everything about his demeanor had changed from the time I had seen him before. And also, I don't want to get too far down into this guy's personal life here. I mean, I guess I haven't said his name on air, so
Right. Right.
if he's listening to this, I guarantee he knows I'm talking about him. But
Yeah.
some of the other bad habits in his life
Mm.
changed around because of this external stress and this unhappiness that was from his job that was bleeding into his personal life wasn't there anymore. And so he's been drinking less.
Yeah.
His marriage has improved. His relationship with his kids has improved. His relationship with some of his friends has improved. He's showing up more in ways that he couldn't show up before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not just physically showing up, but mentally and emotionally showing up as well. I mean, it has been a life-changing event for him. And if you pulled, if you're Steve Harvey and you go out there and, poll 100 individuals and said, how many of you guys want to quit, $160,000 a year
Yeah.
work from home
Yeah.
job to go install furnace and air conditioners? Probably not very many people would raise their hand for that, but it's been the best thing that ever happened in his life.
That's an incredible story. But I mean, the guy's living his purpose. He's, nobody put a gun to his head. He's just like, hey, I'm interested in this, and this is what I want to go do. And I have this, he calls you. He's excited with an internship opportunity. He's excited because he's taken his first step down a path of something he actually wants to do. And
Yeah.
he's out of he got out of something that he thought he wanted to do, and then realized it was something very different than what, in theory, what he probably believed it was going to be. And
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to admit this now, but I'm going to just because, like, when he first called me and told me about this, I was like, man, he must be drinking way too much.
Yeah.
Like his drinking problem, like he must have a drinking problem.
His judgment's impaired or something here.
Yeah, there's something going on here. Like this doesn't compute for me.
Right.
And it was enough where I was asking him some probing questions that, around like, hey, what else is going on in your life now, buddy?
Right. Do a welfare check.
Yeah, is everything okay? Because I thought there was a screw loose, and man, I couldn't have been more wrong. The screws were right where they were supposed to be. He had it figured out. I was the one that didn't have it figured out.
Well, what I love about this is it's like it illustrates the point that you hear a lot, and it's hard to see it in reality though, which is you can't take any of this stuff with you.
Yeah.
So what are you doing, and how are you spending your time, and what kind of life are you living, and what do you need versus what do you want? I need a bigger house. What do you need a bigger house for? Well, I really want a bigger house. Okay, so to pay for that bigger house, you need to make a certain amount of money. That means you're potentially going to be doing work you don't want to do, but you're going to have to stay in that work because you have a debt now associated with it, because it was a want versus a need.
So one additional part of this story about my friend that I want to tell, and then we can wrap this up. So one of the biggest concerns that he had, talking to him a little bit after the initial, breaking the ice of telling me he quit his job, one of his biggest concerns was income. He said, I'm leaving, a mid 6-figure job, and I'm making $24 an hour as a journeyman HVAC installer. So 3 years later, he makes more money now than he did at his HR job. And it goes to show, like, if you're successful and if you can figure out the recipe for success, and like newsflash, a lot of times it revolves around hard work. And, it seems to be the recipe for success in a lot of different, or the secret ingredient to success in a lot of different recipes is working hard. He put the same work ethic into HVAC that he did into HR, and he's no longer just an HVAC installer. He's helping run this company now.
Nice. Yeah.
And making significantly more than he was before.
Yeah.
And he's significantly happier.
Yeah.
And again, it's like, if you can be successful, highly successful, doing something that you don't love, maybe even doing something you don't even like, imagine how successful you can be doing something that you do like.